The stage lights came up slowly, like a sunrise that wasn't quite sure it wanted to be seen yet. Blue and white beams swept across the vast auditorium, catching on the polished floor and the expectant faces of thousands who had come to witness dreams either take flight or quietly fall apart. The audience buzzed with restless energy, the kind that only exists when hope and judgment sit side by side. This was America's Got Talent, where every step onto the stage carried the weight of possibility. From the wings emerged a man no one would have noticed on the street. He wasn't young, he wasn't flashy. He didn't wear a designer jacket or carry the swagger of someone certain they belonged there. His shoulders were slightly hunched as if he had spent years apologizing for taking up space. His hair was touched with gray, his suit plainly pressed but clearly borrowed or bought years ago for occasions that rarely came. His shoes were scuffed at the toes, betraying long days spent standing, walking, working, living a life far removed from spotlights and standing ovations. He paused at the center of the stage, blinking as the lights hit his eyes. For a brief moment, he looked overwhelmed, like a man who had accidentally wandered into a world not meant for him. The crowd clapped politely, not with excitement but with curiosity. The judges smiled in that practiced way, encouraging, but guarded. "Tell us your name," one of them said. "My name is Daniel," he replied. His voice was soft, steady and unassuming, not nervous exactly, more like someone who had learned long ago that raising his voice didn't change much. "And where are you from, Daniel?" "Ohio," he answered, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Nothing remarkable so far. Ohio had sent many hopefuls to this stage before. Teachers, factory workers, retirees chasing second chances. Daniel fit neatly into a category the show knew well. The kind of contestant audiences nodded at kindly before moving on. "What do you do for a living?" another judge asked. "I work nights at a distribution warehouse," Daniel said. "Loading trucks, been there almost 20 years now." A few murmurs rippled through the audience. Respect maybe, or quiet surprise. 20 years of lifting, stacking, sweating, work that rarely earned applause. Daniel stood with his hands clasped in front of him, eyes flicking briefly to the crowd, then back to the judges, as if reminding himself to stay present. "And why did you decide to come on America's Got Talent?" the judge pressed. Daniel took a breath. "Just one, I guess," he said carefully. "Because some things deserve to be heard, even if they come from ordinary people." The words lingered longer than expected. Not dramatic, not rehearsed, just honest. The judge nodded. "All right then. What will you be performing for us today?" Daniel swallowed. He glanced down at the stage floor for a moment, as if gathering courage from the ground beneath his feet. When he looked up again, his eyes were clear. "I'll be singing an Elvis Presley song." The reaction was immediate. A few people laughed out loud, others exchanged amused glances. A ripple of chuckles spread through the audience like a wave that couldn't quite be stopped. Elvis, on this stage, in this era, the king of rock and roll had been impersonated, reimagined, and overdone for decades. Elvis jumpsuits, wigs, Elvis impressions that felt more like karaoke than courage. One judge raised an eyebrow trying to hide a smile. Another leaned back slightly in their chair. "Elvis, huh?" one of them said, half joking. "That's a bold choice." Daniel smiled too, not embarrassed, not defensive, just gentle. Like he had expected this. "Yes sir," he said. "I know." The laughter softened but didn't fully disappear. The audience was already making assumptions, filing Daniel away into a familiar mental drawer labeled nice, but not memorable. He could feel it, he'd felt it his whole life, that quiet dismissal that came before anyone truly listened. The judge leaned forward. "You do realize Elvis is, well, Elvis, big shoes to fill." Daniel nodded. "I'm not trying to fill them." That gave the judges pause. I just want to sing." Something in his tone shifted the room ever so slightly. The laughter faded to silence, not dramatic silence but curious silence, the kind that waits. Daniel stood there, breathing steadily, his heart pounding against his ribs. He thought of the long nights at the warehouse, the hum of conveyor belts, the way music in his earbuds made the hours bearable. He thought of the mirror in his small apartment, where he practiced quietly so as not to disturb the neighbors. He thought of all the times he had been told, kindly or not, that dreams were for other people. And yet, here he was. The host stepped in, trying to keep things moving. "All right, Daniel. Whenever you're ready." Daniel adjusted the microphone stand, just a little. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. He took one more look at the judges, then out at the crowd, a sea of faces he would never meet but would never forget. Somewhere in the audience, someone whispered, "Elvis, really?" Daniel closed his eyes. In that brief second before the music began, he wasn't on a massive stage. He wasn't being judged. He was just a man holding on to something precious, something personal, something that laughter couldn't take away. He opened his eyes again, calm settling over him like a quiet promise. He had chosen Elvis, and whether they laughed or listened, this moment, this choice, already mattered more than anyone in the room could possibly know. The music had not started yet, but something in the room had already changed. Daniel stood at the microphone, shoulders squared now, his breathing slow and deliberate. The laughter had faded, replaced by a waiting hush, the kind that feels heavier than noise. One of the judges leaned forward, sensing there was more behind the man standing so quietly on stage. "Before you sing," the judge said gently, "why Elvis?" It was a simple question, but Daniel's eyes flickered, as if a door inside him had just been opened. One he hadn't planned on walking through so publicly. He hesitated. For a moment, it looked like he might shake his head and say something safe, something small, a rehearsed line about loving classic music or growing up on old records, the kind of answer that would satisfy curiosity without revealing too much. Instead, Daniel took a breath that seemed to come from deep within his chest. "My dad," he began, then stopped, his jaw tightened slightly. "My dad loved Elvis." The words landed softly, but they carried weight. The audience leaned in, the judges didn't interrupt. Somewhere in the back of the room, a cough echoed and quickly died away. Daniel swallowed. He worked construction his whole life. Hard man, quiet, didn't talk much about feelings. A faint smile touched his lips, but when Elvis came on the radio he'd sing every word. A few people in the audience smiled, recognizing the image instantly. A working man softened by music. Daniel's gaze drifted upward, not toward the lights but toward a memory only he could see. "When I was a kid he'd play Elvis on Sunday mornings. Real loud. Said it made the house feel alive." He let out a small, breathy laugh. Drove room relaxed with him, sharing the warmth of the moment. "But a few years ago," Daniel continued, his voice lowering, "my dad got sick." The smile faded. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. A hush fell so complete it felt like the air itself had paused. Daniel's hands tightened around the microphone stand. At first, it was little things. Forgetting names, forgetting where he put his keys. He shook his head slightly. "We all told ourselves it wasn't that bad." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But it gets bad. It always does." Somewhere in the audience, a woman pressed her hand to her mouth. A judge's expression softened, no longer professional, no longer distant. Eventually, Daniel said, "My dad forgot who I was." The words came out steady, but they carried a quiet devastation that didn't need tears to be understood. "I'd walk into his room, and he'd look at me like I was a stranger. Polite, confused." Daniel exhaled slowly. He was still kind, still gentle, but the man who raised me, he was slipping away. Daniel shifted his weight, grounding himself. "We tried everything, full stories, old routines, nothing worked." He looked down briefly then back up. "Except Elvis." The single word seemed to echo. "One day," Daniel said, "I was sitting with him. He hadn't spoken in hours. Just stared out the window like the world was happening somewhere else." His voice wavered for the first time. "I didn't know what to do anymore." The audience was utterly still, so I played an Elvis song on my phone. "Can't help falling in love." A collective breath was drawn, and suddenly, Daniel said, eyes glistening now, his fingers started tapping. He smiled through the memory. Then his lips moved. Daniel's voice softened, almost reverent. He sang every word. The judges exchanged glances. This was no longer an audition, it was a confession. For 3 minutes, Daniel continued, "My dad was back. He looked at me and said my name." He smiled, his voice cracked slightly. I hadn't heard him say my name in months. The silence in the theater was sacred. After that, Daniel said, even when he couldn't remember anything else, Elvis stayed. He nodded once. Music reached him when nothing else could. Daniel took a breath, steadying himself again. "My dad passed away last year." A few quiet sobs could be heard now. No one tried to stop them. "I never got to say goodbye the way I wanted to," Daniel said. "But every time I sing Elvis it feels like a conversation we're still having." One of the judges cleared their throat, visibly moved. Daniel lifted his chin slightly. "I'm not here to be the best singer in the world," he said. "I'm here because music gave me my father back, even if only for a moment." He looked directly at the judges now, no fear in his eyes, only sincerity. "And I think there are people out there who've lost someone piece by piece. People who know what it's like to watch someone fade." He paused. "If this song reminds them they're not alone, then that's enough for me." The room remained silent, not because no one knew what to say, but because everyone felt the same thing at once. The laughter from earlier felt like a distant memory, the skepticism gone. In its place was something deeper, something human. A judge finally spoke softly. "Thank you for sharing that with us, Daniel." Daniel nodded, grateful but composed. He adjusted the microphone once more, hands steady now. When the music finally began, it wouldn't just be an audition. It would be a bridge, between past and present, between loss and love, between a son and a father who still lived on in every Elvis note waiting to be sung. The first note didn't arrive with a flourish. There were no dramatic drums, no sweeping orchestration, no sudden burst of lights designed to announce something spectacular. Instead, the opening chords floated gently through the theater, soft and familiar, like a memory knocking quietly before being let in. Daniel closed his eyes. For a brief moment the world disappeared, the judges, the audience, the cameras, the expectations. All of it faded until there was only the music and the space it created. His shoulders loosened. His breathing found the rhythm. When he opened his mouth to sing, his voice came out low and unguarded, carrying a tenderness that immediately felt different from anything the room had expected. Wise men say, only fools rush in. It wasn't perfect. There was a slight roughness at the edges of his voice, a grain shaped by years of singing quietly to himself after long shifts by age, by life. But what it lacked in polish it made up for in truth. Every word sounded like it had been lived in, worn gently over time like an old jacket that still fit just right. The audience shifted, almost unconsciously. A few people who had been leaning back in their seats leaned forward instead. Phones that had been raised earlier now hung forgotten at people's sides. Daniel gripped the microphone stand lightly, as if it were the only thing anchoring him to the stage. He wasn't performing at the audience. He was singing through them, letting the song travel outward, searching for anyone who might need it. But I can't help falling in love with you. The room began to change. The usual tension of competition, the mental scorecards, the silent comparisons, dissolved into something softer. People weren't judging his range or technique anymore. They were listening, truly listening. One of the judges blinked slowly, surprised by the sudden tightness in their chest. Another crossed their arms, not defensively, but as if holding something close. This was Elvis, yes, but stripped of impersonation, stripped of spectacle. This was a man offering a song the way one might offer a letter never sent. Daniel's voice wavered slightly on the next line, not from fear but from memory. Shall I stay? Would it be a sin? He opened his eyes then, gazing out at the audience. For a split second, the lights reflected off the moisture gathering there. He didn't wipe it away, he didn't look down, he let it be. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman reached for her husband's hand. A few rows back, a young man swallowed hard, reminded of his grandmother, of Sunday afternoons filled with old records and quiet laughter. Across the aisle someone closed their eyes, carried somewhere far away. Like a river flows, surely to the sea. Daniel's voice grew stronger, not louder, but fuller, as if the song itself was lifting him. He stood straighter now, no longer the hesitant man who had walked onto the stage. This was someone rooted in purpose. The judges exchanged glances again, but this time there was no surprise, only recognition. They knew this feeling. This was the reason the show existed in the first place, the reason countless auditions were endured, for the rare moment when something real cut through everything else. Darling, so it goes. The audience was completely silent now, not the kind of silence that waits for a mistake, but the kind that protects a moment, afraid that even a breath might shatter it. The air felt thick, charged with emotion shared by thousands at once. Daniel's mind flickered briefly, to his father's room, to the hum of the medical equipment, to the way his dad's eyes had lit up when the song began. He sang the next lines not just for the people in front of him, but for the man who had taught him how to listen, how to love quietly. Some things are meant to be. His voice cracked on the final word. A small, involuntary sound escaped him, a breath caught halfway between a sob and a smile. He pulled back slightly from the microphone, closing his eyes again as the last note lingered in the air, fragile and unfinished. The music faded, no one moved. For a heartbeat, then another, the theater remained suspended in that final note, as if the room itself needed time to come back to earth. Daniel stood perfectly still, head bowed, hands resting against the microphone stand. He hadn't planned to cry, but tears slid down his cheeks anyway, unashamed. They fell not in sorrow, but in release. Years of holding things in, of being strong when no one was watching, of carrying grief quietly. They all found their way out in that silence. The first clap came from somewhere in the middle of the audience. Just one, then another and another. But it wasn't thunderous applause yet. It was something gentler, deliberate, like people needed to make sure the moment was truly over before responding. A judge rose slowly to their feet, then another. The standing ovation grew, not in volume but in meaning. People weren't cheering wildly, they were honoring something. A story, a memory, a love that had found its way into song. Daniel looked up startled. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the sight: judges standing, audience members wiping tears, strangers applauding a moment they had all somehow shared. He stepped back from the microphone, placing a hand over his heart, overwhelmed. For the first time since stepping onto the stage, he smiled fully, not in relief, not in pride but in gratitude. In choosing Elvis he hadn't tried to impress, he had tried to remember, and in doing so, he had reminded an entire room of something easily forgotten, that music, at its best, doesn't perform, it connects. The applause continued, rolling through the theater like a slow, steady tide. It wasn't the explosive kind that demanded attention, it was warmer, deeper, as if every pair of hands clapping was doing so with intention. Daniel stood at the center of the stage, blinking through tears, unsure where to place himself in a moment that no longer felt like his alone. When the applause finally softened, the room exhaled together. Daniel reached for the microphone again, his hand trembling just slightly. He hadn't planned to say anything more. The song had said what it needed to say, but something in his chest, something shared now by thousands of strangers, urged him forward. "I'm sorry," he said softly, a nervous laugh slipping out. "I didn't mean to get so emotional." A judge shook their head gently. "No, don't apologize." Another judge leaned forward, eyes still shining. "That was incredibly moving." Daniel nodded, pressing his lips together, trying to steady himself. He glanced out at the audience, and for the first time, he didn't feel small, he felt seen. One of the judges spoke again. "Daniel, that wasn't just a song, that was a story, and you told it with so much heart." The Daniel swallowed. "Thank you." The judge paused then asked, "Can I ask you something? When you were singing, who were you singing to?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked down, then back up, his gaze drifting past the judges, past the lights, as if searching for someone just out of sight. "My dad," he said simply. Then after a moment, "and anyone who's ever lost someone before they were ready." The words hit the room like a soft echo. Heads nodded. Some people closed their eyes, absorbing the truth in them. Another judge stood, stepping out from behind the desk, a rare gesture that immediately drew attention. The audience murmured. "I want you to know," the judge said, voice thick with emotion, "that what you did up there took courage. Real courage. You didn't hide behind big notes or flashy tricks. You stood here and offered something deeply personal. That kind of vulnerability, it changes people." Daniel listened, eyes wide, as if unsure whether he was allowed to receive such praise. "I've been doing this a long time," the judge continued, "and moments like this, moments where music reminds us of who we are why we sit at this table." The judge turned slightly, gesturing toward Daniel. "You reminded us that talent isn't always about perfection. Sometimes it's about compassion." The word seemed to hang in the air. Compassion. Daniel felt it settle into him, warm and grounding. He took a breath. "If it's okay," he said hesitantly, "there's something else I wanted to say." The judges nodded immediately. Daniel faced the audience fully now. The lights no longer blinded him, they illuminated him. "When my dad was sick," he said, "I used to feel so alone, even surrounded by people, I felt invisible." His voice softened. "But music, it kept me company, it reminded me that someone, somewhere understood." He paused, letting the silence hold his words. "There are caregivers out there watching tonight," Daniel continued. "People who sit beside hospital beds. People who sing to loved ones who can't sing back anymore." His eyes glistened again. "I just want you to know, you matter. What you do matters." A quiet sob rippled through the crowd. A woman in the front row pressed her hands together, tears streaming freely now. Daniel's voice grew steadier. "This song isn't mine. It belongs to all of us who hold on when letting go feels impossible." The audience erupted, not in cheers but in something deeper. People stood, not because they were told to but because they felt compelled to. The standing ovation returned, stronger now, filled with purpose. One judge wiped their eyes openly. "Daniel," they said when the noise settled again, "you've just done something extraordinary. You've reminded millions of people watching at home that kindness doesn't have to be loud to be powerful." Another judge nodded. "You turned this stage into a place of healing." Daniel let out a shaky breath, overwhelmed. He hadn't come to heal anyone, he had come to sing, and yet somehow, compassion had taken the stage in his place. The host stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Whatever happens next," they said quietly, "this moment will be remembered." Daniel nodded, unable to speak. As the judges prepared to give their feedback, the atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. This was no longer about advancing to the next round or earning approval. It was about connection. About the invisible threads that tie strangers together through shared loss and shared hope. When the final judge spoke, their voice was calm but firm. "Daniel, you didn't just perform tonight, you gave." The word resonated. "You gave your story, you gave your heart, and in doing so, you gave people permission to feel." The audience applauded again, and this time, it was unrestrained, full, grateful, alive. Daniel stood there, hands over his heart, realizing something profound. Compassion, when offered freely, multiplies. It doesn't stay on the stage. It moves through the room, into living rooms, into quiet hospital rooms, into the spaces where people need it most. And in that moment, America's Got Talent became something more than a show. It became a shared human experience, sparked by one man, one song, and the simple courage to care. The stage lights dimmed slightly, softening the edges of everything they touched. The applause, still echoing in waves, finally began to fade. Not because the emotion had run out, but because it had settled. Like a deep breath after a long cry, the room had found its calm again. Daniel remained at center stage, hands folded loosely in front of him. His posture relaxed in a way it hadn't been when he first walked out. The tension that once lived in his shoulders was gone. Whatever happened next no longer felt like something to fear. The host stepped forward, smiling warmly. "Daniel," they said, "this is one of those moments people don't forget." Daniel nodded, eyes shining. "I don't think I ever will." he replied softly. The judges prepared to give their official responses, but even they seemed aware that numbers, votes or yeses and nos felt small compared to what had already occurred. Still, this was a competition, and tradition mattered. The first judge spoke, their voice measured but emotional. When you told us you were singing Elvis, people laughed, not because Elvis isn't great, but because it's been done so many times. They paused. What you showed us tonight is that it's not about what you sing, it's about why you sing. The audience applauded again. You reminded us, the judge continued, that music is memory, music is love, and when it comes from a place that real, it becomes unforgettable. A second judge leaned forward. Daniel, I've seen thousands of auditions, incredible voices, perfect performances. They shook their heads slightly, but very few moments where time seems to stop. A small smile appeared. This was one of them. Daniel pressed his lips together, nodding slowly, taking it all in. The third judge spoke last, their tone gentle but resolute. Tonight, you didn't come here to win a competition, you came here to honor your father. They paused, allowing the words to breathe. And in doing so, you honored every person who's ever loved someone deeply. The host turned to Daniel. Daniel, you've received. Before the words could finish, the audience erupted again. Sensing what was coming, cheers, applause, and shouts filled the theater, not because of a result but because they wanted the moment to last just a little longer. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed. When the formalities were complete and the cameras shifted away, Daniel finally stepped off the stage. The roar of the audience followed him, fading gradually as he moved down the corridor behind the scenes. The noise transformed into a distant hum, like an echo from another world. Backstage, the quiet felt surreal. A production assistant handed him a bottle of water. You were amazing, they said, eyes still wet. Thank you, Daniel replied, voice barely above a whisper. He found an empty corner and sat down, the reality of what had happened settling slowly into his bones. His phone buzzed in his pocket, one message, then another, then dozens. Names he recognized, names he didn't, old coworkers from the warehouse, cousins he hadn't spoken to in years, strangers who had somehow found his social media. My dad had Alzheimer's too. Thank you for singing for us. You made me feel less alone tonight. Daniel stared at the screen, stunned. He hadn't expected this part. He hadn't imagined that his private grief would ripple outward, touching lives he would never meet. He typed one reply, then stopped. There were too many. Instead, he whispered quietly, "You're welcome," into the empty space around him, hoping somehow the words would reach them. Later that night, long after the studio lights went dark, Daniel stepped outside. The air was cool, the sky stretched wide above him, dotted with stars he rarely noticed during his night shifts. He looked up and smiled. "Did you hear that, Dad?" he murmured. They listened. For the first time since his father's passing, the ache in his chest felt lighter, not gone but softened. Like grief had finally been met with something strong enough to hold it. In the days that followed, clips of Daniel's audition spread everywhere. But people didn't share it because it was flashy or viral. They shared it with quiet captions. This made me cry. This reminded me of my mom. This is why music matters. Daniel returned to the warehouse the following week. The conveyor belts hummed as they always had. The boxes kept coming. But something was different. Coworkers stopped him to shake his hand. Some hugged him without saying a word. Others shared stories they had never told anyone before, about parents, spouses, memories carried in songs. Daniel listened. That, more than the applause, felt like the real gift. One evening, after a long shift, Daniel sat in his car before driving home. He turned on the radio. An Elvis song came on, soft, familiar. He didn't sing along right away. He let it play, letting the notes fill the silence, letting the memory of his father sit beside him. Then quietly he joined in, not for an audience, not for a stage, but for love. And somewhere in living rooms across the country, in hospital rooms, in quiet moments of remembrance, people thought of Daniel, of a man who chose Elvis and reminded the world that the most unforgettable moments aren't about perfection. They're about humanity. And that was a moment that would live forever.